How are you? Thanks for being here, live or recorded. Get your coffee. I got the book. So good, so good, so good. Ah, so yesterday I started chapter 2, and today I'm going to finish chapter 2, the greatest miracle in the world. So I'm wondering, why did Simon ask Og, the author, Og Mandino, that question? Let's find out. Simon folded his hands and looked down at me with a self-satisfied grin. Do you realize what you have just done, Mr. Og? I caught your paperweight. More than that, your action temporarily suspended the law of gravity. By any definition of a miracle, you have just performed one. Now, what would you judge has been the greatest miracle ever performed on this earth? I thought for several minutes, probably those cases where the dead have supposedly come back to life. I agree, as would a consensus of world opinion, I am sure. But how does all this connect to those books you've got piled up? Certainly they don't contain any secret methods on how to come back from the dead. But they do, Mr. Og. Most humans in varying degrees are already dead. In one way or another, they have lost their dreams, their ambitions, their desire for a better life. Wow. They have surrendered their fight for self-esteem, and they have comprised their great potential. They have settled for a life of mediocrity, days of despair, nights of tears. They are no more living deaths confined to cemeteries of their choice. Yet they need not remain in that state. They can be resurrected from their sorry condition. They can each perform the greatest miracle in the world. They can each come back from the dead. And in those books are the simple secrets, techniques, and methods which they can still apply to their own lives to become anything they wish to be and to attain all the riches of life. I didn't know what to say or how to respond. I sat staring at him until he broke the silence. Do you accept the possibility of individuals performing such a miracle with their own life, Mr. Og? Yes, I do. Do you ever write about such miracles in your books? Sometimes. I would like to read what you have written. I'll bring you a copy of my first book. There are miracles in it? Yes, many. When you wrote it, did you feel the hand of God upon you? I don't know, Simon. I don't think so. Perhaps I shall be able to tell you after I have read it, Mr. Og. We sat after the exchange in a stillness interrupted only by an occasional rumble of a truck or bus bouncing along the ruts of Devon Avenue. I sipped the sherry and felt more relaxed and at peace with the world than I had in many months. Finally, I placed my glass on the small polished end table next to my chair and found myself staring at two small photographs, each enclosed in a small bronze frame. One was a lovely brunette woman, and the other of a blonde male child in military uniform. I glanced at Simon, and he sensed my silent question. My wife and son. I nodded, his voice, now so soft that I could scarcely hear him, seemed to float across the small room to me. Both are dead. I closed my eyes and nodded again. His next words were barely a whisper. Dachau, 1939. When I opened my eyes, the old man had his head bowed, and his two giant hands were clenched together tightly against his forehead. Then, as if embarrassed that he had momentarily exposed his grief to a stranger, he sat up and forced a smile. I changed the subject. What do you do, Simon? Do you have a job? The old man hesitated for several moments. Then he smiled again, spread his hands in a self-effacing gesture, and said, I am a rag picker, Mr. Ogg. I thought rag pickers disappeared with the soup kitchens and hunger marches of the early 1930s. Simon reached across, placed his hand on my shoulder, and squeezed it gently. By definition, Mr. Ogg, a rag picker is one who picks up rags and other waste materials from the streets and junk heaps to earn a livelihood. I would imagine that sort of rag picker has almost disappeared from the American scene during these years of nearly full employment. But we can see them again if conditions change. I doubt it. Our crime rate seems to be telling us that we've discovered faster and easier ways of laying our hands on a buck, like mugging, armed robbery, and burglary. I'm afraid that what you say is true, Mr. Ogg. Still, in this day of soaring prices for paper and metals, I would imagine that a rag picker or junk man could do quite well for himself. However, I am not that sort of rag picker. I seek more valuable materials than old newspapers and aluminum beer cans. I search out waste materials of the human kind. People who have been discarded by others or even by themselves. People who still have great potential but have lost their self esteem and their desire for a better life. When I find them, I try to change their lives for the better, give them a new sense of hope and direction, and help them return from the living dead, which to me is the greatest miracle in the world. And of course, the wisdom I have received from my hand of God. Books has helped me immensely in my, what shall I call it, profession. See this wooden cross that I often wear? It was carved by a young man who once was a shipping clerk. I ran into him one night on Wilson Avenue. Or rather, I should say he ran into me. He was intoxicated. I brought him here. After several pots of black coffee, a cold shower, and some food, we talked. He was truly a lost soul, crushed by his inability to properly support his wife and two young children. He had been working at two jobs more than 17 hours a day for almost 3 years, and he had reached the breaking point. He had begun to hide in the bottle when I found him, trying not to face his living death, and a conscience that was telling him he didn't deserve his wonderful young family. I managed to convince him that his situation was common and far from hopeless, and he began to visit me nearly every day. Before he went to his night job, together we explored and discussed many of the ancient and modern secrets of happiness and success. I imagine I touched on every wise man from Solomon to Emerson to Gibran, and he listened carefully. What happened to him? When he had $1,000 saved, he quit both jobs, packed his family in their old Plymouth, and he headed for Arizona. Now they have a tiny roadside stand just outside of Scottsdale, and he's beginning to command fairly large prices for his wood carvings. Now and then he writes, always thanking me for giving him the courage he needed to change his life. This cross was one of his first carvings. He's now a happy and fulfilled man. Not any richer, mind you, just happier. You see, Mr. Ogg, most of us build prisons for ourselves, and after we occupy them for years, I'm sorry, I just lost my place. I got so emotional. Most of us build prisons for ourselves, and after we occupy them for a period of time, we become accustomed to their walls and accept the false premise that we are incarcerated for life. As soon as that belief takes hold of us, we abandon hope of ever doing more with our lives and of ever giving our dreams a chance to be fulfilled. We become puppets and begin to suffer living deaths. It may be praiseworthy and noble to sacrifice your life to a cause or business or the happiness of others. But if you are miserable and unfulfilled in that lifestyle and know it, and then to remain in it is a hypocrisy, a lie, and a rejection of the faith placed in you by your Creator. Simon, forgive me, but does it ever occur to you that perhaps you should not intervene in the lives of people, or that you have no right to do so? After all, they're not out there looking for you. You must find them and then convince them that they can have a new life if they are willing to try. Aren't you trying to play God? The old man's face softened in a look of sympathy and compassion for my apparent lack of perception and understanding. Yet his reply was brief and forgiving. Mr. Ogg, I'm not playing God. What you will learn sooner or later is that God very often plays man. God will do nothing without man, and whenever he works a miracle, it is always done through man. He rose as if to bring our visit to an abrupt end, a technique I have used frequently at the office, if it was in my best interest to terminate an interview. I shook his hand and I stepped into the hallway. Thanks for the hospitality and the sherry. It was my pleasure, Mr. Ogg, and please bring me a copy of your book when you have a chance. During that long drive home, one question continued to intrude itself into my thoughts. If that wise old rag picker specialized in rescuing human refuse, why was he wasting his time on me, an affluent and successful company president in the 50% tax bracket who had just written a national bestseller? So that's chapter 2. In a couple of days, we'll do chapter 3. So please give me a like, give me a comment so we can stay connected. And I'd love it if you subscribed and shared. The greatest miracle in the world profoundly impacted my life, and I am blessed for that. My mentor, Robert Hollis. Yeah, from Robert Hollis, my business partner, my mentor, more importantly, a very dear friend. Take care of you. You're very special to me. And finish your coffee.